Thank you, Alejandra, and I would like to give a very warm welcome to all your followers. I am Alejo, and I have been flying for 37 years. I am entering my 38th year. I started in 1987 with Eastern Airlines in Miami. That's where they had their training department. And I flew with them until 1991. I was based in Boston, New York City, and Miami. In 1991, I was able to go over to American with a very small group of flight attendants that we had to be Spanish and Portuguese qualified in order to go on into this new project when American acquired the Eastern Airlines Latin America bases. At that time, I was based for a while in Miami, and then I transferred to Los Angeles, went back to Miami until at the end of 1994, I had the opportunity to come over to one of our foreign crew bases, which is Argentina, Buenos Aires. And as an Argentine, I was able to come here for, as a matter of what is the work permit. It allowed me to be here because it's a complete different contract. Throughout the years, I've been able to do a lot of special projects, being in the recruitment department, in the instructing department, in the training department for a very long time. And I've had the pleasure of flying the purser position. That's a little bit about myself.
Hello everyone, thank you for being with us today. In this opportunity, I will conduct this interview in English because of the topic, and soon you will realize why. I have with me my dear colleague Alejo Larocca again, and this time he will talk about the story of the Latin bases of different airline companies, including Argentina, our country. So please give a warm welcome to my colleague Alejo. Alejo, thank you very much for being with us today.
Hello, Alejandra. It's my pleasure to be with you again today.
Thank you very much, Alejo. Alejo, as you know, we are very lucky to be passionate for what we do. So my first question is, why are you so passionate about this topic of the story of the Latin bases of different airlines, and why is this so important for the aviation industry?
Well, first of all, I strongly believe that in order to understand the present, we have to know the past and to know very well the history of it. I am a very passionate person about history, and through the years that I've been flying, I learned a lot about how the bases grew throughout the decades, starting as a matter of cultural awareness. Mm-hmm. Because the history of the bases go all the way back to the 1930s. And I believe it's very, very important for the aviation industry, because as the world revolves and as the world changes, cultures do change a lot. And in the aviation industry, that is a customer service business, we have to understand that not everybody is the same. And in order to really reach into our customers, we have to be very sensitive about it. And I think the tool of having foreign-based flight attendants, cabin crews, not only for American, for many, many, many airlines around the world, it's a very key subject to succeed for the airlines, because they know how to really reach into the customers and create loyalty from the customers towards the business of the airline.
Right, indeed.
So that brought to me, along my career, a great desire of learning about the background of our bases.
Wow, that's so nice. Yes, and I really agree that the Latin bases really improve the service of all the airlines. Yes, well, not only Latin bases, all the bases of the different airlines. Good. And what do you think that has led to the creation of these bases, of the different bases of the airlines?
Well, in particular, in Latin America, the very first foreign carrier that had a crew base was Panagra, Pan American Grace Airways, which was the key founder of the bases that we are part of today. Because when people take a look about the subject or at the history of why do, for example, American Airlines has today 4 cabin crew bases in Bogota, in Santiago, in Lima, and in Buenos Aires. Well, American didn't open those bases in 1990. They have been open since the 1930s.
Right, not many people know that.
Not many people know, not many people in Latin America know, and much less, I would say, in the United States. A lot of people is completely unaware. In order to understand, as I mentioned before, the present, we have to go a little bit back in history. In 1928, Panagra, Pan American Grace Airways, started operation in Lima, Peru, as a combination of a business that started with Pan American Airways and Mr. Grace. Mr. Grace was an American living in Lima, Peru, who had a lot of money and a lot of businesses, and overall he had a shipping company. Cargo shipping company. So they got together, Pan Am and Mr. Grace, and they decided to create another airline that would fly only the Pacific routes from Panama all the way down to Argentina. At that moment, we have to understand that in the 1930s, a lot of women didn't have many opportunities in different types of jobs. So Mr. Grace did exactly what Pan Am was doing at the time, only hire male flight attendants with the title purser. Why purser? Because the purser was the person that carried the document's purse. And the action of taking the document purse on every flight is the purser.
Right.
So that's where the title comes from. So the very first crew members were based in Lima, Peru in the 1930s with Pan American Grace Airways. Panagra, as it is known in the aviation history, never had any flight attendant based in the United States, even though it was a U.S. carrier. The pilots were based in Lima, and then in the 1950s and 60s they were transferred to Miami. They were all Americans. But the flight attendants were always based in Lima. Their training center was in Lima. Their headquarters of Panagra was in Lima. With time, they opened another base. They opened Buenos Aires at the end of the 1940s, beginning of 1950s. They opened Buenos Aires as a second crew base. At the time, they already had women flying. They used to call them stewards and stewardesses at the time. So those were the 2 bases that Panagra had in Latin America, and they kept until their very end, when they merged with Braniff in 1967.
Good, very interesting indeed. And Alejo, what led to the creation of these bases, and how did Braniff come into the picture?
Well, following the history path, as I mentioned before, Panagra had a base in Lima. When aviation started to grow after World War II in the 1950s, they decided to open another base in Buenos Aires. In the United States at the time, it was not easy to find people that spoke Spanish fluently. So they knew that they had a very big asset, because the majority, the 80-90% of their customers were from Latin America. So already having a Lima base, it was for them a great asset, not only from the language point of view, but also from the culture, the awareness, the welcoming. Flight attendants knew their customers, Only few people were able to fly at the time, but they flew very often, so they knew their families, they knew their names. And it was a really key element, it was a very good tool that Panagra had. They decided to open a base in Buenos Aires because they were expanding. So at the time, of course, there were propeller airplanes, DC-4s, DC-6, DC-7s, and the flights took much longer. So the legalities of the crews, they were limited, and their trips were very long, sometimes 10, 11, 12 days. So they decided to open another base, Deep South America, as they called it, in Buenos Aires. At the time, Braniff had started flying already into Latin America. And they saw that Panagra, which was their big competitor, had their crew bases in Buenos Aires and Lima. So at the end of the 1950s, Braniff decided to open and do a tryout with Buenos Aires. And they hired a group of men and women that were stationed, they were based in Buenos Aires. Basically, they flew to Brazil, to Miami, to New York, Mexico, and with the beginning of the jet age at the end of the 1950s, when they decided to place the Boeing 707 on the routes, the base grew on a bigger number. At the time, there were two foreign airlines, Braniff International and Panagra, that had, for example, in our country, two bases. Panagra already had the Lima base. And with time, in the 1960s, the United States government decided that Pan American Airways could not have any more stake on Panagra because they consider it a monopoly. So basically they forced the sale of Panagra. They basically told Pan Am, you cannot own Pan American Grace Airways.
Right.
At the same time, Mr. Grace was a much older gentleman. He did not want to continue with the airline business, and he preferred to sell the entire company, all the assets, the fleet, the personnel, to Braniff. And from 1965 to 1967, a merger process began. That ended up in 1967 when Braniff International absorbed the Pan American Grace Airways operation. And in that way, Braniff was able to acquire a lot of destinations that you and I fly today, because those were the keystones of the route, like Guayaquil, Quito, Lima, La Paz, Santiago. All those were routes that belonged to Pan American Grace Airways. So when Braniff bought Panagra, they bought their airplanes, which were only 6 DC-8. They bought the two crew bases, Lima and Buenos Aires, and they bought all their ground personnel and the assets that they had, like offices, ticketing offices, etc. Not the pilots. The Panagra pilots lost their jobs in the United States and they had to reapply with other airlines. That was the end of Pan American Grace Airways in 1967 and the beginning of a much bigger operation that continued growing with Braniff through the 1970s, because the two bases did not stay only in Lima and Buenos Aires. The Braniff history continued to grow after that.
Right. And how did it continue to grow?
Well, going back to that very important question that you asked me, why did these airlines decide to hire foreign-based crew members? Well, Braniff realized that, for example, the Brazilian market, as it is today, it's a very special and picky market. The Brazilian customer loves, as everybody else in the world, being addressed and being talked to in their own language. So Braniff decided to open up a base in Rio de Janeiro in the 1960s. With the continuation of the process and the expanding of Braniff, then came Bogota in 1971-72. Then at the same year came Santiago, Chile. And in 1978, the last base that Braniff opened was Panama City. So if we think about it, Braniff flew from 1928 to 1982, when for economic reasons, after the deregulation act in the United States, a lot of airlines folded because their economy was doing really bad, and the strong ones, as American, United, Continental, continue flying. And until 1992, Braniff had what they call the Latin America division. Everything that was from Mexico all the way to Argentina was exclusively flown by the Latin America-based flight attendants. Braniff had bases in the United States. They had a base in Boston, they had a base in Minneapolis, they had a base in Dallas, Houston, and a temporary base in Los Angeles. But those flight attendants, those United States flight attendants, only flew inside the United States, some Mexico destinations, Europe and Asia.
Right.
Everything that went from Mexico City to Argentina was shared among the bases in Latin America. Once again, they were Panama, Lima, Bogota, Santiago, Buenos Aires, and Rio. So at one point, one of the US airlines, one of the biggest, had 6 flight attendant bases in Latin America. Those flight attendants, as it happens today with America, they were able to fly together. Sometimes on a flight from Buenos Aires to New York, you will find some flight attendants from Rio, Buenos Aires, and Santiago base mixed together, as it happens today with the current bases that we have.
Right. Wow. I would ask you forever millions of questions. I would stay here forever because it's a pleasure to hear you, really, to hear all this. And this made me think, how were you able to gather all this information throughout all these years? I suppose you also did a great research, right?
It's a mix of researching, passion, and also through my peers. I have to tell you that my very best professors in this subject were the peers. That's something I learned from the Asian cultures, to learn from the people that have arrived into this world before us. I don't like to say older people.
Right.
So I asked a lot of questions throughout the years. When I had the opportunity, the great opportunity, to fly with men and women that started with Panagra, with Braniff. So I asked them a lot of questions. A lot of them, knowing my passion, they gave me a lot of their memorabilia, which I still hold very dearly in my home.
Right.
I have pictures, magazines, a lot of airline memorabilia that tells the long history of the Latin America bases. And I think it's very important for your followers and for people to know that as huge and wonderful as it is today, American Airlines and United Airlines, those 2 US carriers also through acquisitions became such big carriers because of the good management, but also because of the foundations of airlines that were there before. In the case of United, Pan Am, because they acquired a lot of assets, routes, foreign-based flight attendants, because United also has foreign-based crew bases, not in Latin America, but they still do one in London, they do one in Tokyo. At one point, United inherited from Pan American the Singapore, Bangkok, Hong Kong base, as well as Paris and Frankfurt.
Oh, wow.
And because of contracts with their union, which is the AFA, they had mixed crews. In each one of these bases, you had local people, as we know, foreign-based flight attendants, and also American flight attendants that were able to go and be based there. That was until 2020, when COVID hit bad, and United decided to close all the bases with the exception of Tokyo and London. So when you go on a flight, let's say on United from Tokyo to Los Angeles, you may find Tokyo-based flight attendants that are Japanese 100%, and also American flight attendants that are based in Tokyo. So going back, American, when it comes to the history of the cabin crew bases in Latin America, it's not something that goes back to 1990, July 1990, when American started the operation after purchasing the Latin America routes from Eastern. It goes all the way back to 1928 when Panagra started, 97 years ago, if we think about it.
Right.
Now, we talked before about 1982 when Braniff folded their wings. As I mentioned before, deregulation hit hard in the United States. That meant a lot of younger generations do not know what deregulation is. In 1977, President Carter decided to begin a new project of deregulating the skies in the United States. That meant that any airline could fly anywhere.
Right.
And charge whatever they wanted to charge. Well, the airlines that were very strong in the business and in their economics, they were the ones that succeeded. Braniff was in a process that had a lot of economic turmoil. So they decided to sell the entire Latin America structure to Eastern Airlines. Eastern was another big carrier in the United States that started in the late 1920s and flew until 1991. That's the airline that I started flying for in the US. What happened in May 1982? Braniff decided to sell all the routes, thinking that they were going to be able to keep up on flying just inside the United States and maybe some European flights, which they didn't. They had to call in for Chapter 11, which is total bankruptcy in the United States, and they stopped their operation. But a year before had started a whole process of the sale of the routes and the flight attendant bases. Because with the routes, when they sold the routes, they sold the assets, the same thing as Panagra had done to Braniff in 1967. The buildings, the ground personnel, and the flight attendant bases. That, once again, at the time of the sale of Braniff, Eastern acquired bases in Panama, in Santiago, in Lima, in Bogota, in Rio, and in Buenos Aires. Among those 6 bases, they were at the time approximately between 450 and 500 flight attendants that flew the operation. But we also have to think that at the time, there were no daily flights, there were not non-stop flights, because the airplanes, only the 747s, but the other airplanes didn't have the range to go from Buenos Aires to Los Angeles without stopping in Santiago, in Lima, in Bogota. Right. When Eastern got the bases and got all the routes, they couldn't start to fly them immediately. They had to wait. They had to receive the approval of the different Latin American governments. That was a very bureaucratic process. But Eastern decided from the very first moment not to continue the Panama base and not to continue with the Rio base. So in 1982, before even starting to fly to those destinations, Eastern made retirement packages for the Panama and the Rio base flight attendants, and they closed those flight attendant bases. They didn't continue.
Right.
So they decided to keep only Bogota, Lima, Santiago, and Buenos Aires. Well, Eastern Airlines only flew Latin America for 8 years, from 1982 till 1990. And in those years, at one point, they decided to unify the Santiago and Buenos Aires base. They decided to close the Santiago base, but they gave the opportunity to the Chilean flight attendants to transfer to Buenos Aires. Eastern Airlines gave them their work permit to come to Argentina and based them here. Not all of them came over, because a lot of them did not want to commute, because the majority of them kept their domicile and their homes in Santiago and they were commuting, something that nowadays is very normal. Right. But back then, a lot of them didn't want to put up with it. So the Buenos Aires base grew in the mid-80s, we'll say, that happened in 86, 85, 86. And Eastern then kept only Buenos Aires, Lima, and Bogota. In 1990, when Eastern Airlines was doing very badly in their finance, and they were coming from a very long strike from the mechanics. I went through that strike in the United States because I was based in the United States. The airline was completely shut down for months. Wow. We kept on flying because they had recruited a lot of outside, they outsourced the maintenance of the company, so we kept on flying, but the company shrunk a lot. And when they sold the routes, the same process started again. They sold the routes to American Airlines. Right. So the whole process of the assets and the cabin crews and the ground personnel, in order for American to start to fly the Latin American routes, the package came with all that. That is why it's so important to know the history. Because sometimes we say, well, why do they have foreign-based flight attendants? Well, that's the long history. You know, sometimes it's not very clear, the message, if we don't know the history behind it. So when American decided to buy the routes, they had to buy the whole package. It was the whole package or nothing. And they were thinking, of course, about customers, money, building up a big business, which it is where it is today, because we are the biggest carrier in Latin America by far. Right. So Immediately in 1991, American saw they had the right to reopen the Santiago base. So they decided to reopen that base. And a lot of those Chilean flight attendants that were based here in Buenos Aires went back to Santiago. And also they hired people from the street, new flight attendants. Because they knew, American really understood that the Chilean market was very, very special, and they were going to be much more welcome on board their airplanes, respecting the American culture, but with Chilean flight attendants.
Correct.
So they decided to, and nowadays we have these 4 bases.
Wow, I would stay here forever hearing all this. So interesting, really. On a more personal level, on another token, but on a more personal level, what is your most treasured memory of all the things that you have experienced during all these years in your career?
Well, I think that this particular job gives you so many different opportunities, from getting to know people to learning a lot. This subject that we are talking today opened a lot of doors to me about, the history of the aviation in Latin America, which is so rich, and created a passion for me that I still hold today, and that I have created basically a museum with lots of things, because I am a great believer in history, in understanding history, in getting to go to know the facts, to understand the present. And also, when you were asking me about different experiences and the passion about this subject, it's also very important to know that Panagra, Braniff, Eastern, American were not the only airlines that had the foreign crew bases in Latin America.
Exactly. What are the other airlines?
That's a much bigger scope.
Right.
For example, United Airlines for a few years had a base in Santiago, Chile. But they did not grow that experiment, we would say, because they were very big and they were very focused on Asia and Europe. That's why they expanded their crew bases in Asia, and in Europe they opened up Paris and Frankfurt and London. But it's very important to know that when we go back in time, always understanding the customer, understanding the culture, the local culture, British Caledonian, which was one of the British carriers, in the 1960s and 70s, had bases in Rio de Janeiro, Caracas, Bogota, and Buenos Aires. The base in Buenos Aires was suddenly closed with the advent of the War of Malvinas in 1982.
Right.
So from that day on, from April the 2nd on, British Caledonian did not come back to Argentina, and all the flight attendants were paid off, and they shut down the base because it was a war between Argentina and England. But they kept the bases in Bogota and in Rio. In 1985, British Airways decided to purchase British Caledonian. And British Airways decided to keep the Rio-Bogota base and also open Caracas. And in 1992, when British Airways decided to start flying to Argentina because they had the legal right, the route they acquired through the purchase of British Caledonian, in a peaceful approach, I would say, they decided to open up a crew base here in order to show to the customers the importance that the British and the Argentine crew members were able to work together and provide a magnificent customer service.
Right.
And they did, because the base was open in 1992 and they closed in 2017. They were open for a long time.
Right, yes.
So that base, when they opened up the base, nobody from British Caledonian was rehired because a long time had gone by, 10 years. So they were all new flight attendants that started brand new in Argentina. The operation was different because British Airways, with their foreign-based crew bases, had a different system than other airlines. They only had between 2 and 4 flight attendants on each flight, and the rest were all London-based. So they mixed them in order to be able to provide a touch of culture from the local country. But British Airways is very important to say that has been the airline that at one point had 22 foreign crew bases. That's a lot. In Latin America, if we talk about our continent, they had Mexico, Caracas, Bogota, Rio, and Buenos Aires. But the other 17 bases were in India, in Pakistan, in Asia. Nowadays, they only kept Tokyo, a few in India, and Mexico. That's all they have. But they still have those foreign crew bases.
Wow. I suppose you have many treasured memories, many of them, because your career has been so long and so enriching. So, well, what is your most treasured one, or what would you like to share with the community that is watching us now?
Well, I look at memories in 2 different paths, Alejandra. One is the different memories that I have in my job, and the other one is the memories as a memorabilia, which that to me is a different path, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity of sharing that. I have to tell you that in my most treasured memories as a cabin crew, as a flight attendant, I've learned a lot from people. And at the same time, I learn a lot from kids, from people from different cultures. And I also learn a lot that when you see somebody, for example, very, very famous, that you have very high expectations, then you meet them and you are with them in an enclosed environment for such a very long time, for 11 hours, for 10 hours, and you really see that they are absolutely normal human beings who can be very moody, very simple, very arrogant. And I can tell you, I know that today privacy laws prevent us from a lot of talking, but when you have somebody that is followed by millions and millions of human beings like Madonna, and then one night I remember when she had finished filming Evita in Argentina in the late 1990s, and she boarded the flight here in Buenos Aires, and I had to attend her, to serve her during the flight. I've learned a lot of what humbly you can be humble and learn from someone so famous. Sometimes we keep people up here, and we see that they're very, very normal human beings.
Right.
That they have taken a different path of life, and they have become very rich and very famous, but they are people, normal. They eat, they go to the bathroom, they sleep, they snore, they do everything.
Yeah, just like everybody else.
Exactly, just like everybody else. But also in the memories that I treasure is the friendships, the opportunity of knowing the world, the opportunities that this job provides you, such as benefits, that you can travel the world. You do it yourself too, because I have been able to discover on my free time countries and places that I probably would have never been able to go if I wouldn't have this job.
Right.
Because I have friends that have fabulous jobs and they have well-paid jobs, but they never been in such places.
Right.
So when I tell people that on my time off I went to Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan or Pakistan or South Africa or Maldives, they look at me like I'm from another planet. And I believe that we are blessed individuals. Anybody that works for an airline is a blessed individual, because every day that you go to work, it's a new memory that you treasure because it's completely different. And the second path is the memorabilia.
Right.
The camera cannot capture, but we are in a place where you can see there is lots of memorabilia.
A lot.
Pictures, books, and I like it because it's part of how the fascinating business of aviation has been created. I particularly like the cabin crew history. That's what I've written about in my 3 books.
Right.
That's the articles that I have written when I presented to different papers that I've done.
One of the articles I will share with my community with your permission, and you also have here your second book.
Yeah, this is my second book, my Pan Am story. This book, talking about foreign crew bases, it's the story of the very first Argentine stewardesses that Pan American hired.
Right.
This was I call a very advanced woman. When you talk about treasuring memories, I treasure her memories because this was my mother's best friend.
Yes.
And
you say that in your book. I read it myself and it was incredible. I loved it. Yeah, I couldn't put it down, really. Yeah, it was really, really interesting. Now it's not available anymore.
It's not available, but sometimes maybe on a second-hand store you can find it, or on Amazon or on
I will not
eBay
sell mine. I will keep mine. But yeah, exactly.
What I tried to do on this book was mainly I wanted to tell her story.
Right.
There was a foreign woman, foreign for the United States, that in 1950, she applied for Pan Am, because that's very important also to know. When we go into the memorabilia, into the history path of aviation and cabin crews, it's very important for your followers and for people that want to fly to know that Pan Am did set the path for a lot of other airlines. For example, today we see that Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait Airways do hire people overseas. They do hire people overseas for 2 reasons. First of all, because they want to be able to reach to every customer, because they are very different cultures, and they want to have people from all over the world, so the customers feel that they are going on a worldwide carrier that is aware of their cultural needs.
Right.
And also because it's not easy to hire in their countries people that has the languages for the destinations that they fly. Well, Pan American Airways in the 1940s and 50s did put the first stones into this path that was created, because they decided to hire people overseas and take them to the United States.
Right.
Yes, back then the immigration laws were much easier. So what they did is they hired in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Austria, and Japan. And then in Latin America, they hired in Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay. So they would go once or twice a year and hire women 2 or 3 times a year. And they will give them the job and take them to the United States, provide them the documentation, and they would fly for Pan Am based in the state. That's why a lot of people, when you talk about Pan Am at the very end, they still remember the senior flight attendants that were Danish, German, Argentine, Mexican, Italian, because they had been hired in the 1950s like this lady was. Miss Federici was hired in 1950 and she flew for 40 years. She flew what I recall the very best years of airline aviation.
The golden years.
The golden years. And in the book, I kind of divide in 4 different decades her history with the history of Pan Am.
Yes.
And also at the time, Pan Am had bases for their US-based flight attendants in Beirut, Lebanon, in Rome, in Lisbon, in Tokyo. And then towards the end, because of a cultural matter and an economic matter, and because otherwise their crews would have to go on 10, 12 day trips, they opened up a base in Rio de Janeiro, in Nairobi, Kenya, in Delhi, in Tel Aviv, in Warsaw. So they had 5 foreign crew bases, Pan Am, prior to their demise in 1991. So when you were asking me about the memoirs, the memories, the memorabilia path, it's so rich that I believe that for all of us that like aviation, we really enjoy the history that comes behind.
Right.
And talking about history, and you were something that I want to show you. For example, here we see a picture of the very famous Pucci uniform of Braniff. If we take a look, I mean, it's very sexist. I'm not saying sexy, which is sexy, but it's sexiest because you see the type of uniform that in 1970, 1969 was used on the airline.
Right.
Because 95% of the customers were men. They wanted a way of the airlines to attract or to call their attention was through the uniforms.
Right.
And that's why we see uniforms with mini skirts, with very bright colors. You know, Braniff created a pattern of designs by Emilio Pucci of Italy, who decided to give a company a revamping, a whole new look by designing uniforms that could call people's attention. But going through the memorabilia that you and I were going through before this interview started, I found this article that is from 1967. This is a magazine called 𝐬𝐳𝐬𝐷. It was an in-house magazine from Braniff, flight attendants, based in Latin America. But take a look at the title, Alejandra.
Yes, fresh carioca flesh.
For announcing the new Rio de Janeiro-based flight attendants.
Right, the female flight attendants.
Exactly.
Right.
This is something that, yes, it is history, but today would be completely against the law.
Correct, yes.
And we went through 4 or 5 different magazines of the time, and they present the Buenos Aires as the Buenos Aires flesh or the fresh flying flesh as there is another one.
Here we have a fresh flying flesh. Yes.
Which is something that we cannot even conceive today.
Exactly.
These are from 1968, so we see how times have changed, and I strongly believe for the better, but also it's very important to understand the past. I hope truly that through you and through your channel and through your followers, we can contribute at least one drop of knowledge to a lot of people that still is not aware of how rich it is to have foreign crew bases.
Right.
How wonderful it is. Because people tend to think, oh, well, you know, airlines do have foreign crew bases because of cheap labor, of this, of that. And that's not necessarily the case.
Exactly. Yes. It's really important.
It's really important. It has to do with cultural awareness. You know, it has to do with understanding the customer.
Right.
It has to do with providing customer service. I remember an ad that British Airways, I still have it very fresh in my mind, an ad that they put on the national paper of Argentina, and I will say it as it was and then I'll translate it, promoting that they had cabin crew base here. It's at British Airways, we called suitcases, but you may think, what is he talking about? In Spanish, the ad went like this. En British Airways, a las maletas nosotros las llamamos valijas, porque en British Airways tenemos tripulantes argentinos que entienden su lenguaje mejor que nadie.
Ah, muy bien.
So basically the ad said, you know, at British Airways we call suitcases the way that Argentines call suitcases.
Right, yes.
Because we have Argentine crew members that understand very deeply the way you communicate.
Right.
That was a very good marketing tool.
Yes, indeed.
If you think about it.
Yes.
So it's very, very important that I hope that people understand that when we see foreign-based crew members, there is a long history behind it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, Japan is a country that has an amazing culture. It's very hard to enter the Japanese market because the Japanese customers are very demanding in a good way. They are very proper, very humble, but they are very strict in what, and they know very well what they want and what they don't want. So a lot of foreign companies had a lot of trouble entering the Japanese culture. That's why they had to adapt in the in-flight arena, in the airline history, the services to Japan. You know, airlines of the United States, they have to have a Japanese service on board, they have to have Japanese speaking flight attendants, because that's a way of capturing the attention and the loyalty of our customers. And at the same time, because of Japanese are so respectful of cultures, Japan Airlines has the same kind of process that British Airways did for decades with their foreign crew bases. Because even though their headquarters is Tokyo, the 95% of the crew members are based in Tokyo, they do have foreign bases. They do have a base in Hong Kong, they have a base in Bangkok, they have a base in Singapore for language purposes and for culture purposes.
Right.
And at one point they hired a lot of people that spoke Portuguese, because they did approach the Brazilian culture as something completely different than their culture, and they wanted always thinking about the customer.
Right.
That's what we have to put in first place.
Correct.
In our business.
Correct. And on the same token, what would you say that the Argentine base offers the best? What is the best that we have to offer, in your opinion?
I think the best thing that we offer as a crew to our local customers is the ability to make them feel at home. Because even though from the very first moment they step on the airplane, they are on a foreign carrier, because to them it's a foreign carrier.
Right.
Immediately there is that culture match that makes them feel at home.
Yes.
We can see it.
Yes, and
they
even
feel
for foreigners too.
Exactly.
Even when they are not from Argentina,
Exactly.
they feel really, really comfortable with us.
And they ask you questions on where to go, what to do, what part of the country to see.
Right.
And in a way, we become a marketing tool for the company. Because when a customer is asking me where to go and eat in Buenos Aires, or what part of Patagonia should I advise him or her to visit, or what part of the north of the country, I am turning myself into a marketing tool for my own company.
Correct.
But I think it starts with the very first step, that is the language barrier. There's no language barrier. You're on a foreign carrier that makes you feel at home from the moment that you step on the aircraft, speaking Spanish.
Right.
And also I like to see that for when the customers leave Argentina, we operate flights with Dallas base, with Miami, with New York, and that's also very welcoming. I like to see it that when they step on our flights and they are leaving Argentina, either on business or pleasure, it's like they are putting the bow on their trip. They're closing their trip. It's my last connection with Argentina that is taking me home. My Argentine crew on board the airplane.
Yes, yes. I even had a South Korean passenger from the land of my husband, and she also mentioned that she was very happy to have a crew from Argentina. Yes, yes. Diplomatically speaking, South Korea and Argentina had got closer. So she was very happy too, yes. And with her, I think she had brought her family too. Really nice.
Yes, because I think also the people, a lot of people still don't know, even though, as we mentioned, for decades and decades and decades, these foreign carriers have been having foreign crew members. A lot of people are not aware of. So it's a very nice surprise. It's like, I don't know, if you would board an Air France flight in Tokyo and the crew is all Japanese, but they respect the French culture, and they go with the French culture. So it's a very moving touch, I'd like to say.
Yes, really heartwarming. Well, Alejo, I would be here forever, really. You have many pieces of history here, and also here you have a picture behind you. You told me that it is connected to some aviation-related uniform. Is it
Exactly.
Like that? Yes?
Well, this picture that we have right here, the mother of a very dear friend of mine, she painted it for me at my own request. She paints beautifully. That's what I think about it. And it was based on this very uniform designed by Emilio Pucci for Braniff. Mm-hmm. This is a uniform that the flight attendants wore from 1973 to 1976.
Uh-huh.
So Emilio Pucci designed this beautiful, colorful uniform in the tones of turquoise, green, white, and blue. And that is basically when I like this uniform so much and I wanted to have something that called the attention when you enter my house. And that's why I asked this friend of mine to paint me this painting based on the colors of the pattern of the uniforms of Emilio Pucci designed for Braniff International. So basically
nice.
That's the story behind the
Wow.
picture.
And here you have a lot more, I think. For example, this one.
For example, this is one of the... We talked before about Braniff International when they opened up the base in 1958. This is one of the very first cabin crew groups hired in Buenos Aires.
Wow.
So we can see, their beautiful white gloves and their pillbox hats and how they all had to look the same. Because even though today we cherish so much, diversity, one of the things that back then, for younger generations to understand, airlines use the military look a lot.
Yes.
Not only for the uniform, but everybody had to look the same.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that's why the women had... Usually they cut their hair
and
they all had to wear their hair very short and they all had to be kind of the same height. It was a purpose for that because they related that to the marketing of the company and to the image of the company.
Right.
So basically, that is why. In this picture that we showed before, something else I want to mention on this picture, for example, this is another one of the Pucci uniforms and we see the colorful airplane. That was very typical from the 1970s because going on an airplane, it's part of a vacation, part of happiness, part of color. Take a look at this interior. This was named the Ultra Look campaign on Braniff. They wanted to have orange, yellow, bright colors that would call red the people's attention and they would match their... Today, you look at this and, oh my God, I will have a headache if I see this. But I had the opportunity to start my career in the 1980s and we still had some airplanes that had these designs inside. The 70s was more bright oranges, yellow, sunny colors. The 80s was more terracottas. When I started flying, was more the browns, the beige, green, So the airplanes, the interiors were those colors. But it's amazing how history, it's very clearly seen through everything in aviation, through marketing campaigns, through articles, as we saw, referring to the new flight attendants as fresh flesh.
Yes.
My goodness. Or pictures, uniforms. If we go out today with a uniform like this, people will probably think that we are going into a custom party.
Exactly, yes.
Yes.
Now I think we look more professional, I would say.
I think it has to do with the years because I think... If you think about it, when we take a look at a picture like this, which is a black and white picture, but very military look, very uniform style, this was the 1940s, 1950s. Then the 1970s that came, with the miniskirt and all that, we came into this, or with these very colorful uniforms, which is basically the same, and with the new era of the 1970s that had to do with a much more bohemian approach, and then we went into the, as we were talking before, into the sand colors because it was more a calm look.
Right.
And then in the 1990s, aviation went back into that uniform blue, black, dark blue, dark gray uniforms that we have today.
And here I see you also have some news articles, right? You have,
Exactly.
well, one of them you wrote yourself, and I will share with my community.
Well, that article particularly, looking back, this is the last voyage of the Interamericano service. This is an article that I wrote for a publishing company in South Florida in the United States, talking about the very last flight from South America, which was Caracas, to Miami before American took over. I was lucky enough to be one of the flight attendants. I was called on reserve. I didn't bid for the flight or anything, but I was called on reserve one morning to fly on a 727 on August 15th from Caracas to Miami, and that was the very last flight.
How lucky you
that Eastern Airlines had from Latin America back to Miami. So this article, The Last Voyage of the Interamericano Service, it's something that I wrote years ago about the last Eastern Airlines flight into Latin America.
Here we have a news article, Argentine national newspaper, right? La Nación.
This is from July 1990. This is 35 years old. And this was the presentation of the very first flight, the inaugural flight of American Airlines, starting July 2nd. And one of the things that they mention here is how they hire the people from Eastern Airlines that knows you so well to keep on flying with the successor, which was American. And how marketing tools have changed that we were talking about. It's this is a picture of one of the flight attendants from the 1970s.
Think of her as your mother.
Exactly. In a sexy pose, right? With her uniform and with her mini skirt dress.
The hairstyle.
The hairstyle, the bow, the cape. And that's why I think, it would be my dream to someday be able to present everything that I have, because I think there is a lot of people that would like to see this material.
Yes. And later we will have a new interview, a new meeting where you can share all your memorabilia, all the things you have, so you have kept all throughout these years. It's incredible. This is a great piece of history.
Thank you.
So happy that you have saved and kept everything, because in some cases you told me that some airlines wanted to just get rid of all that material, right?
Yes, well, this is something I learned being in the United States. In the United States, they tend to, I love how they keep the museums.
Right.
And, it's something that history is preserved.
Right.
It's like when we take a look at pictures from our family, it's a way of preserving history, our own history. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I would love to see all these articles and pictures and things that I have and books and memorabilia and all uniforms. Someday we'll talk about that, but I would love to see that exposed somewhere, because I think it's a good piece of history from aviation that a lot of new generations need to see in order to comprehend what we went through.
Right. And Alejo, now reaching the end of our interview, I would like to ask you, what is the biggest lesson you have learned all throughout these years?
From my job?
Yes.
Well, I want to be humble about this response, and I want to tell you that I have learned that every single human being can teach you a very big lesson, not to ever judge, that every day that I go to work can be a new learning experience. But I can tell you that nowadays, probably the biggest lesson that I hold very dear in my heart is the unity of your peers. On the last interview, we talked about the meaning of crew, working together with a common goal. But in the last year, and after so many years of flying, I have come to understand. I was always being able to have very good rapport with my peers, but I have come to understand the value, the importance of teamwork, and the support among your peers. Being so cohesive, being so united in a work group is not something easy to find. It is, I think it's a very big diamond when you find that. And in our job, we are very different people. We don't have to necessarily be friends. But that unison, that dedication, that support among peers at the end of the day is there. And that is a very valuable lesson that I have learned through years. The importance of treasuring the value of camaraderie among ourselves.
Right. I agree. And also, teamwork, especially in our job, is so important. So I think it's really heartwarming to see that it is genuine. So I completely agree. Well, Alejo, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. And before leaving, I would like to ask if you have some final words to offer to the community that is watching us today.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Alejandra, for your kindness, for your interest, and for overall for reaching out to your community and to your followers. And overall, I think you are doing a great job in providing people. I see it as a little bridge. You are providing them with a bridge that they can cross over to something new, to an unknown part of aviation. And also you are creating awareness and what our job is about. So I wanted to share, first of all, this with you, and thank you very much for that, because that's how I see it. And to your followers, aviation is a magnificent place to be. It's a great job. It's full of new opportunities. It's full of people that opens so many doors to us. And going back to what we talk about today, it's full of history. It's full of rich history that has made aviation what it is today. So for those of you that decide to pursue a career in airline as a cabin crew, hopefully, because that's what I and you hold a big passion for, but if not, as a pilot, as a ground agent, as a cargo handle, as a mechanic, every single person that works for an airline will tell you that there is no other job like it. It's amazing. Regardless of the company that you work for, I have seen it through the decades that I've been flying. People love working for an airline. People love aviation. And once aviation gets into your blood, it does not get out. So I wish every one of your followers the best of luck, and hopefully we'll get to see them very soon in another meeting, in another interview.
Yes, thank you very much, Alejo. Thank you so much for this interview. It's been a real pleasure. And well, thank you for being with us today. Again, I'm so happy. I felt so comfortable and so happy to learn all this. It's been a great lesson for me too. And I feel so happy for having started this new project of interviewing the people I admire, like Alejo. So, well, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandra. The best of luck.
Thank you.